This is the story of a pregnant woman who lost everything in one night, her job, her home, her hope, and then the billionaire boss changed both their lives forever.
The night Imani Reeves sat on the steps of her former office building with a cardboard box in her lap and nowhere to go, it was raining in Charleston. Not the romantic kind of rain, not the soft, movie scene drizzle that makes everything look golden. This was sideways, cold, mean rain, the kind that finds every gap in your jacket and makes you feel like the universe is personally disappointed in you. She'd been sitting there for 11 minutes. She knew because she kept checking her phone, like the time would eventually tell her something useful. Like maybe if enough minutes passed, she'd figure out her next move. She was 37 years old, 14 weeks pregnant, and she had just been walked out of the building she'd spent the last 4 years helping build. The severance letter was tucked inside the box, and underneath her desk, succulent and the framed photo of her mother. Due to organizational restructuring, your position has been eliminated effective immediately. Signed by HR. No conversation, no warning, just a knock on her office door at 4:50 on a Tuesday and a security escort to the elevator. She'd left her apartment 2 weeks ago, technically her ex-boyfriend's apartment, which she'd been foolish enough to believe was also hers. When he found out about the baby and suggested, calmly and without much emotion, that she figure out her situation somewhere else. She'd been staying with her friend Kezia since then, sleeping on a pull-out couch, telling herself it was temporary. It was supposed to be temporary. Her phone buzzed. Kezia. Hey, I'm so sorry to do this. Derek's mum showed up and needs the room. You can't stay tonight. I'm so sorry, Imani. Call me. Imani read the message twice, set the phone down on top of the cardboard box, watched the rain hit the screen and blur the words. She didn't cry. She wanted to. The tears were right there, stacked behind her eyes like they'd been waiting in line. But something steadier took over. Some stubborn, quiet part of her that had survived worse. And she just sat there, breathing, letting herself feel exactly how bad this moment was without completely falling into it. That's when the black SUV pulled up to the curb. The window came down, and the man who had technically, until 40 minutes ago, been her boss, leaned across the center console and looked at her sitting on those wet steps with her cardboard box and her rain-soaked jacket. And something moved across his face that wasn't pity. It was something harder to name. Imani. His voice was low, careful. What are you still doing here? She looked at him, really looked at him, the way you look at someone when you have absolutely nothing left to lose, and said, trying to figure that out, actually. Connor Hale didn't say anything for a moment. The rain drummed on the roof of the car. The city moved around them like they were standing still inside a snow globe. Get in, he said finally. Please. And because she was out of options and too tired to perform dignity, she picked up her box and got in. Have you ever had a moment where the worst night of your life turned into something you couldn't have written if you'd tried? Drop a below, because this story is just getting started. Here's what you need to know about Connor Hale. He was 41 years old and had built Hale Development into one of the Southeast's most recognized real estate firms before he turned 35. He ran 4 miles every morning before 6, kept his Charleston penthouse exactly the way he liked it, orderly, quiet, controlled, and had been told by 2 different therapists that he used work as a substitute for emotional connection. He thought both therapists were probably right and hadn't gone back to find out. He wasn't cold. That was the thing people got wrong about him. The people who worked for him knew he remembered birthdays, took calls from his team at midnight when there was a crisis, quietly paid the hospital bills of a junior analyst whose kid got sick 2 years ago. He felt things deeply. He just didn't know what to do with feelings once he had them. So mostly he kept moving fast enough that they couldn't catch up. His marriage had ended 3 years ago. Quietly, civilly. The kind of divorce where both people agree it wasn't working and nobody throws anything, but somehow that makes it worse, because you're left asking, if it wasn't dramatic, was it even real? He and Rebecca had been together for 6 years. They'd wanted different things without ever being honest about it until it was too late. She wanted roots in one city, a slower life, kids maybe. He'd said he wanted that too, and he'd believed it when he said it. But the work kept pulling, and he kept letting it. And one day, she looked at him across their beautiful dining room table and said, "I don't think you actually want this. I think you want to want it." She wasn't wrong. He'd thrown himself into the company after that, where he expanded to 3 new markets, won awards he put in a closet, bought the penthouse, kept moving. He knew who Imani Reeves was before he hired her. She'd built a name in Charleston's non-profit architecture space, designing community centers and affordable housing projects that actually looked like someone gave thought to the people living in them. He'd recruited her specifically to lead Hale's community development division, a new arm of the company he was genuinely proud of. She'd been exactly as good as he'd hoped. Thorough, creative, unafraid to push back when she thought he was wrong. He hadn't known about the layoffs in her division until this afternoon. That was true. His CFO had restructured 3 departments while Connor was closing a deal in Atlanta. And by the time Connor landed and checked his messages, it was done. What he hadn't expected was to find her sitting on the front steps in the rain. He hadn't expected the way that image would settle in his chest like a stone. He drove without knowing where he was going, the heater running, the rain loud on the roof. Imani held the cardboard box in her lap and looked out the passenger window, and he noticed she wasn't crying. Most people would be crying. She was just watching the city go by with this expression that was somehow both devastated and completely composed. And it struck him, not for the first time, that she was one of the most self-possessed people he'd ever met. "I didn't know about the layoffs," he said. "I want you to know that." "Okay," she said. Not "I believe you," not "it's fine," just "okay." Acknowledging the information without deciding what to do with it yet. And that was so deeply her that he almost smiled, despite everything. "Where do you need to go?" he asked. "I'll take you." She was quiet for a moment, long enough that he understood, without being told, that she didn't have an answer. He didn't press. He just drove. They ended up parked outside a 24-hour diner on East Bay Street, the kind of place with fluorescent lights and bottomless coffee and booths that have held 1,000 difficult conversations. He got them both inside, ordered decaf without asking when she touched the coffee pot, and then didn't pour, a detail so small he almost missed it. And they sat across from each other, and he said, "Tell me what's going on, all of it." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she laughed. Not a happy laugh, more like the sound of something releasing. And she said, You really don't want all of it, Connor." "I asked," he said. "I want all of it." So she told him. She didn't tell it dramatically. That was the thing. She told it the way people tell the truth when they're too tired to manage how it sounds. Matter-of-factly, looking at her coffee cup, filling in details without performing them. The pregnancy. How far along she was, the fact that she'd been happy about it before everything collapsed, the apartment situation, her ex, Kezia's couch, tonight's text, the job, the box now sitting on the booth seat beside her. Connor listened without interrupting. Not the polite kind of listening where you're waiting for your turn to respond. The real kind, where you're actually taking in every word and letting it land. When she finished, she looked up at him like she was waiting for the pity. Waiting for, "I'm so sorry," delivered in that careful tone people use when they want to be kind but also want to end the conversation. He didn't say that. He said, "You're not staying in a shelter." I wasn't planning to ask you for. I know you weren't. I'm not waiting for you to ask. He said it without force, just directness. I have a guest house on the property. It's fully furnished, been sitting empty since my sister moved out 2 years ago. You'd have complete privacy, separate entrance, your own parking, everything. She stared at him. Connor. This is practical, he said, and she could hear him working to keep it practical, to give her something she could accept without it feeling like charity. You worked for my company for 4 years. My CFO made a decision without my approval that put you in this situation. This is me correcting it. The guest house isn't a severance package. No, he said simply. It isn't. A pause stretched between them. Outside, a car went past with music playing, something old and warm. Donny Hathaway, she thought, a song for you. And the rain had softened to a steady murmur against the windows. Why? She asked. Not argumentatively, genuinely. He thought about it. She watched him think, watched him decide whether to give her the safe answer or the honest one. Because, he said finally, I drove past you sitting on those steps and I couldn't leave. That's the whole answer. I couldn't keep driving and pretend I hadn't seen you there. Something moved through her, not the flutter of a romance novel, more like recognition, like being seen clearly by someone and finding out it didn't scare you. She looked down at her coffee. I have a lot of pride, she said quietly. Too much, probably. I know, he said, not unkindly. Say yes, anyway. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the waitress came by, refilled his coffee, left again. Long enough that the Hathaway song ended and something else started. Okay, she said at last. The same word she'd used in the car, but this time there was something different underneath it. Something like the beginning of trust. He nodded. No victory in it, no I told you so, or relief that flattened into uncomfortable gratitude. Just two people who had just agreed to something they both understood was bigger than a guest house. They stayed another hour, talked about nothing critical, a project she'd been working on before the layoff, a building on Broad Street he'd been trying to figure out for months, whether the diner's pie was actually good or just seemed good because of the hour. She laughed for real at something he said, and he noticed how different her whole face looked when she meant it, and he was careful not to let himself look too long. He was careful about a lot of things that night. When he dropped her off at the guest house and handed her the key and watched her stand in the doorway with her cardboard box pressed to her chest, she said, Connor. He looked at her. Thank you. She said it plainly, without performance. I mean it. I know, he said, and drove away before he could do something he hadn't earned yet. Have you ever had someone show up for you in a way you didn't expect? Drop a, if you believe real connection shows up when you need it most. If the next 6 weeks were ordinary in the way that only matters in retrospect. When you look back and realize the ordinary was the whole thing. He didn't hover. That was the first thing she noticed. He gave her the guest house, and he gave her space, and he didn't make it weird with check-ins or meaningful looks or any of the things that would have made her feel like she owed him something. He was just present, in the background, a light on in the main house when she came back late from her doctor's appointment, a text once that just said, grocery run. Any requests sent without expectation. She wasn't idle. Within 10 days, she'd updated her portfolio, reached out to 3 former clients, and landed a freelance consultation with a non-profit in North Charleston building a new community garden pavilion. She worked from the guest house kitchen table while the morning light came through the windows and the baby moved. For the first time, a strange and stunning flutter she wasn't prepared for. And she let herself feel what she actually felt, which was a complicated combination of grateful and scared and stubbornly, quietly hopeful. He started cooking on Saturday mornings, She'd smell it. Good coffee, something savory. And eventually, the third Saturday, she knocked on the back door of the main house because it had been left open, and he was standing at the stove in a worn grey t-shirt making scrambled eggs with too many vegetables, and she said, "Are you feeding an army?" He turned around. "I always make too much. I keep forgetting it's just me." She looked at the pan, looked at him. "I could help with that problem," she said. Or so. Saturdays became a thing. Not a declared thing, not a thing either of them named. Just a thing. They'd cook, or more accurately, he'd cook, and she'd sit on the counter and tell him what he was doing wrong until he made her stand up and demonstrate, and they'd eat at the kitchen island and talk about everything and nothing. Her mother, who'd raised her alone in Atlanta and called every Sunday and was over the moon about the pregnancy. His father, who'd built the first version of the company and hadn't spoken to Connor properly since Connor refused to bring him back onto the board. The baby, who Imani was planning to name Josephine. The way Charleston changed when summer hit, and whether that was beautiful or just hot. One Saturday in her 7th week there, she was telling him about the community garden project, talking with her hands, walking him through a design issue she'd been stuck on, and she turned to find him watching her with this look. Not the careful look, something less managed. She stopped talking. "Sorry," he said. "Keep going." "What was that?" she asked. "Nothing." "Connor." He set down his coffee. The kitchen was very quiet. Through the window, the old oak in the backyard shifted in the breeze and sent light moving across the floor. "I like listening to you work through things," he said finally. "You think out loud in this specific way, and it's—" He stopped, started again. "I just like it. That's all." She studied him for a long moment. There was something happening in the room that both of them could feel, and neither of them had the right words for yet. "That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my process," she said carefully. He almost smiled. It probably shouldn't be. Family, if you have watched this love story to this point, it means you are touched. Leave your thoughts in the comments and hit the subscribe button if you haven't. Smash the like button now if you found value in this content. It truly helps this channel grow. 2 Saturdays later, he kissed her. It wasn't planned. They'd been standing at the back door watching a thunderstorm roll in from the harbor. You could see the weather coming from his yard, the whole sky rearranging itself over the water. And she'd said something about how storms like this used to scare her as a kid, and now they were the things she loved most about Charleston. And he turned to look at her profile, or the way she was watching the sky, and he thought, "I am in serious trouble." She turned and found him looking, and this time neither of them looked away. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to stop it, and she didn't stop it. She closed the last inch herself, and the kiss was soft and careful, and over in a moment. But it rewrote something in both of them that couldn't be unwritten. She pulled back first, touched her lips without realizing she was doing it, looked at him with an expression he couldn't fully read. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said quietly. "I need you to know that." "I know," he said. "Neither do I. Not exactly." "I have a lot going on," she said. "I'm 20 weeks pregnant and I'm rebuilding my career and I'm living in your guest house and I know," he said again. Steady. "I'm not asking for anything, Imani, I promise. I just couldn't—" He exhaled. "I couldn't not do that." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, once, like she was filing that information away. She went back to her guest house, but she was smiling when she crossed the yard, and he saw it, and he let himself feel something he hadn't let himself feel in 3 years. It was his mother who broke it. Patricia Hale had Charleston society down to an art form. The right charities, the right dinners, the right level of warmth in public and frankness in private. She'd supported the divorce from Rebecca quietly and gracefully, hadn't asked too many questions, and had been waiting since then for her son to bring home someone appropriate. She was not a cruel woman. She was, however, a specific kind of woman. The kind who believes that love is real, but also that love requires practical scaffolding, and she had ideas about what that scaffolding should look like. She came for lunch on a Thursday and found Imani at the kitchen island reviewing blueprints while Connor was on a call in his office. Patricia stood in the kitchen doorway. Imani looked up. There was a beat of silence that was polite on the surface and layered underneath. "You must be Imani," Patricia said. "Connor's mentioned you." What Connor had mentioned, it turned out, was more than Imani realized, and what Patricia had concluded from those mentions was enough to bring her here, to look at this woman with her rounded belly and her blueprints and her bare feet on her son's kitchen floor, and feel something she was too careful to name directly. And the lunch was cordial, careful. Patricia asked about the baby's father, and Imani answered honestly, not together, her decision, entirely fine with that. Patricia asked about her plans. Imani explained the freelance work, the career rebuild, the intention to have her own place by the time the baby came. Patricia nodded with her hands folded on the table in a way that said, "I'm listening," while also saying, "I'm not sure I believe this will go the way you think." After Imani excused herself, reading the room with the accuracy she always read rooms, Patricia turned to Connor. "She's lovely," she said. "Mom, I mean it. She's clearly intelligent and I hear a but coming." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, "You just got your feet under you after Rebecca. You've built something real here. And this woman," she chose her words, "she's in a vulnerable place, Connor. They both are. I just want to make sure you're thinking clearly and not..." "Not what?" "Not fixing," she said. "The way you fix things. Because you can't fix your way into a relationship. And I would hate to see you..." "That's enough," he said. Quietly, but with an edge she recognized. She left without saying more. Connor thought about it for 3 days, turned it over the way you turn over something that hurts, because it only hurts if some part of it lands. Was he fixing? Was he so used to solving problems that he'd made Imani into one? Was any of what he felt actually about her? Or was it about the version of himself that wanted to be the kind of man who showed up? He got quieter, a little more distant, nothing dramatic, just slightly less present, slightly more careful. Imani noticed, as of course she noticed. She knocked on his office door on a Sunday afternoon and stood in the doorway and said, "What happened?" "Nothing. Busy week." "Connor." She said his name the way she always did when she was requiring honesty from him. He looked at her. Then he looked away. "My mother was here," he said. She absorbed that. "And?" "She said some things. I've been thinking about them." "What things?" Another pause. Too long. And something moved across Imani's face, not anger, something quieter and more painful than anger. Recognition. The specific, practiced recognition of a woman who has stood in this position before. The position of, maybe you are too much, maybe your situation is too complicated, maybe the people who love him will always find a reason you don't fit. "I see," she said. Imani, "No." She said it gently, firmly. You don't owe me an explanation. We haven't made promises." She took a breath. "But I need to start looking for my own place. I should have already. I'll be out by the end of the month." "That's not..." "It's fine, Connor." And the way she said it, that quiet closing of a door, was worse than if she'd shouted. She left the doorway. He heard her cross the yard to the guest house. He sat in his office for a long time, and the thing his first therapist had told him came back with uncomfortable clarity. "You don't pull away to protect people, Connor. You pull away to protect yourself. Do you think he'll let her go? Drop her? What would you do right now? He called his sister. Nadia Hale was 35 and lived in Asheville and had zero patience for what she called Connor's strategic retreat tendencies. She picked up on the second ring, listened to the whole thing without interrupting, and then said, "So Mom said one thing, and you've been acting like a stranger to this woman for 4 days." "It wasn't one thing, it was one thing. And you let it in because part of you was already looking for a reason to slow down, because you actually like her, and liking people is terrifying for you. Am I wrong?" A long pause. "No," he said. "So the question isn't what Mom thinks," Nadia said. "The question is what you think. And I don't mean what you think about Imani. I mean what you think about yourself. Whether you actually believe you're capable of being in this. Whether you think you deserve it." She paused. "Because if you don't believe that, you'll find a reason to wreck it every time. It won't matter who she is." He sat with that. He thought about Rebecca, about how he'd watched that relationship dissolve without really fighting for it. Not because he didn't care, but because fighting required believing it could work. And somewhere underneath everything, he'd quietly decided that good things he had weren't things he was meant to keep. He'd just let her go, and told himself it was the mature thing. He thought about Imani on those steps in the rain, about how she'd told him her whole situation in a fluorescent-lit diner and held nothing back and hadn't asked him to fix anything. She'd just answered honestly when he asked, because he asked. He thought about the way she laughed when he burned the first batch of Saturday eggs, about her explaining her design philosophy with her hands moving like she was drawing in the air, about the look on her face the morning she first felt the baby move, and she looked up from the kitchen table and her eyes were full and she didn't say anything, just pressed his hand to her side so he could feel it too. He hadn't even thought about it. She'd just reached for him, and he'd been there. He called his mother next. "I need to say something," he told her, "and I need you to hear me, not respond." He told her that he understood her concern, that he knew it came from love, that he was not unaware of the complications. And then he told her that Imani was not a project or a problem or a situation he was managing, that he'd been closer to himself in the last 6 weeks than he'd been in years, that whatever this was, it was real, and he wasn't going to let it go because it looked complicated from the outside. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "I owe her an apology," she said finally. "Yeah," said Connor. "I think you do." He walked across the yard to the guest house at 7 in the evening. Knocked. Imani opened the door with her reading glasses on and a notebook in her hand, and she looked at him with that careful expression she'd developed in the last 4 days, the expression that kept him at the right distance. "Can I come in?" he said. She stepped back, let him in. He stood in the middle of her small living room, the space she'd made entirely her own in the weeks she'd been there, her books stacked on the side table, a plant she'd bought on a Tuesday hanging in the window, and her mother's photo on the shelf. And he said, "I let my mother's voice in because I was already scared, and when I get scared I go quiet. I disappear a little, and I did that to you and I'm sorry." She watched him. "This isn't about your situation," he said, "or the complications. It's about me not being sure I know how to do this without messing it up. And instead of telling you that, I just got distant, which is worse." "It is worse," she said quietly. "I know." She took her glasses off, set down the notebook, looked at him with that unguarded expression he'd only seen a few times, the one she didn't show everybody. "I have walls too," she said, "and my first instinct when you got quiet was to start building them up again, to tell myself I'd known better, that I shouldn't have—" She stopped, started again. I don't want to do that. I'm tired of being someone who disappears into her own armor every time something gets scary. Yeah, he said softly. Me too. The room was very quiet. Outside, the city made its evening sounds. I'm not going anywhere, she said. If you're not going anywhere. He crossed the room, stood in front of her, looked at her for a long time, the whole of her, all of it, unedited. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Josephine Grace Reeves was born on a Thursday morning in early October. Imani's labor was long and harder than she'd expected, and Connor drove her to MUSC at 2 in the morning and sat in the waiting room when they wouldn't let him further, drinking terrible coffee and answering texts from Imani's mother, who was flying in from Atlanta and kept sending frantic updates on her flight status. Nadia called from Asheville, or even Patricia texted, "Tell her we're thinking of her." And Connor read that 3 times before putting his phone face down on his knee. When the nurse came out and told him he could come back, he stood up so fast his chair scraped the tile. Imani was holding Josephine when he walked in, tired, a deep, bone-level tired, but present, completely present, looking at her daughter with an expression that rewrote the room. She looked up when she heard him. "Come meet her," she said. He stood at the bedside and looked at this very small, very serious, completely perfect person in Imani's arms, and something cracked open in him that he hadn't known was there, something that had been sealed for a long time, sealed so carefully he'd stopped being aware of it. "Hi, Josephine," he said, and his voice was rougher than he intended. Imani watched him with soft eyes. "You can hold her," she said. He looked up. "Are you sure?" "Connor," she smiled. "Take my kid." He held Josephine for 20 minutes, standing by the window while the October sun came up over Charleston, and he understood for the first time in his adult life what it felt like to be exactly where you were supposed to be. Imani's mother, Charlene Reeves, arrived 6 hours later, sharp-eyed, quick laughing, with Imani's same way of reading a room in approximately 4 seconds. And she looked at Connor, standing in the corner of the hospital room, and asked her daughter, quietly, while he was getting coffee, "Is that him?" "Mama," Imani said. "So it is," said Charlene, satisfied. 3 months later, on a Saturday morning in January, Connor made eggs with too many vegetables, and Imani sat on the counter and told him everything he was doing wrong, and Josephine was asleep in the baby monitor, and the low winter sun came through the kitchen windows, and he looked at her and said, "I love you." Just like that. Not in a speech, not kneeling anywhere, just over a pan of eggs on a Saturday, the same way you tell someone something true. She looked at him. The moment stretched, warm and full, neither of them looking away. "I love you too," she said. "I've been waiting for you to catch up." He laughed, actually laughed, the real kind, and she climbed down from the counter and kissed him, and the eggs burned again, and neither of them noticed. In March, he showed her a building on Broad Street, the one he'd been trying to figure out for months. A 4-story historic renovation with 2 commercial floors and 2 residential. He spread the plans on the kitchen island and said, "I bought it. I want to convert the upper floors into a live work space. Community-facing commercial on the ground level. Gallery, co-working, a small cafe maybe." He paused. "I want to hire a lead architect." She looked at the plans, looked at him. "You bought a building for me to design," she said. "I bought a building I believe in," he said carefully. "And you're the best person I know for it, professionally." He held her gaze. "The other stuff is separate." She picked up the plans, studied them with that expression he loved, the one where she was already seeing things that weren't there yet, already building something. "My rate went up," she said. "I know," he said. I looked you up." She smiled at the plans. I'll take the job. She did take a new apartment eventually, 4 blocks away, when Josephine was 4 months old. A bright second-floor place with tall windows and good light, because she was someone who needed to know something was hers. Connor helped her move boxes and didn't say a word about it, and that was how she knew she was right about him. He had dinner with her and Josephine 3-4 nights a week. Her mother came for a month in the spring and declared him acceptable and terrifying in equal measure, which Imani told him and which he took as a compliment. He proposed in October, exactly 1 year after Josephine was born, in the backyard of the house with the big oak tree. Just the 3 of them, no audience. A ring his grandmother had left him, and that he'd never had reason to use. He didn't have a speech. He just said, "I want this to be my whole life. You and Joe, all of it." He looked at her. "Say yes." She looked at the ring, looked at him, looked at Josephine, who had absolutely no idea what was happening and was trying to eat a leaf. "Yeah," Imani said, smiling like she hadn't stopped in weeks. "Yeah, okay." What was the moment in this story that hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments, because every one of these moments was earned. 2 years later, Imani Reeves stood inside a finished building on Broad Street in Charleston and let herself feel how much it mattered. The renovation had taken 14 months, and she'd poured everything into it. The kind of work that comes from having something to prove and also deeply not needing to prove it anymore, which turns out to be the best condition for great work. The ground floor held a gallery co-curated with a local arts non-profit, a cafe run by a woman who'd lost her previous space in a rent hike, and an open co-working space with sliding scale membership. Upstairs, 3 live work residences, reserved for emerging artists and entrepreneurs through a fellowship she'd designed herself. The opening night was warm and loud and full. Charlene flew in. Nadia drove down from Asheville with her husband. Patricia Hale stood near the gallery wall, looking at the photographs of the building's renovation process, and when Imani walked past, she said, quietly, "You did something real here." "I know," said Imani, and smiled. She found Connor near the front window with Josephine on his hip. Joe was 22 months old and had recently discovered opinions and expressed them constantly and loudly, which Connor somehow found delightful in a way that made Imani love him without being able to explain it to anyone. She stood beside them. Josephine grabbed a fistful of Imani's hair with her free hand. "Joe," Connor said, with the exact tone of a man who had said this name in this exact tone approximately 500 times this week. Josephine let go, looked very serious about it. "She's going to run a corporation," Imani said. "She is terrifying," Connor agreed fondly, while they stood at the window and looked at Broad Street, the street that had been hers in a new way since she made something on it. And the city moved in its evening way, and the light was the specific gold that Charleston does in October, and it was a moment that knew it was a moment. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. "You good?" She thought about everything that was packed into that question, whether she'd landed, whether she was safe, whether the life was the life. "Yeah," she said, and meant it all the way down. "I'm really good." He kissed her temple. Josephine made a sound of profound commentary that neither of them could interpret, and both of them laughed. Outside, Charleston went on being Charleston, imperfect, beautiful, full of history and possibility. And somewhere in it, 2 people who had both been alone in their particular ways found themselves standing in something solid they'd built together. And it turned out that was more than either of them had known to ask for. It turned out, enough. More than enough. If this story moved you, here's what I need from you. Subscribe to Soul and Heart. New stories every single week. Like this video if Connor and Imani's journey stayed with you. Comment below. What was your moment? The steps in the rain, the Saturday eggs, that last scene on Broad Street. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in love that shows up quietly and stays. Here's my question for you. What's the most unexpected place love ever found you? I read every comment, every one, The greatest love stories aren't the dramatic ones. They're the ones built Saturday morning by Saturday morning, until you look up and realize you're home. Until next time. Soul and heart. Stories worth believing in.